Truth, logic, action, power. It's the GreggHoush show here on New Revolutionary Radio. From the Leonard School in Malden, Massachusetts, Gregg and company are here to bring a sense of ethics to your news. Whether it's politics, activism, or current events, we always seek to inform and never to deceive. Let's start the show.
Welcome to episode 62 of the GreggHoush show. So this week we have all kinds of fun things to talk about. Normally, we have show notes covering 5 pages maybe. That's a lot. Today we have show notes covering like 20 pages.
Yeah, we've made jokes before about the length of our notes, but after missing last week, holy shit, was it like 10 times worse than anything we could have imagined.
We love the length jokes around here. But here we go. There's immigration, there's Cohen, there's Manafort, there's even more Roger Stone, and that guy is just so irrelevant. But here he keeps popping up anyways.
How? You'd think it's like how it's amazing how figures in the right wing, no matter how disgraced and irrelevant they ought to be, they keep returning. Like Newt Gingrich is making reappearances. Ollie North is around. Like, what the shit?
The Supreme Court has failed America many times in the last in this whole last session.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty comprehensively failed.
It's going to continue to do that.
Oh yeah, at this point.
The Democratic primaries, we get Democratic socialists getting voted in
over leading Democrats in the House.
We've still got a trade war, and it is not going good for us.
No.
Everyone else wins when we have a trade war. Wells Fargo still sucks.
Yeah.
ICE needs to be defunded. I mean, the list goes on and on and on.
There's just so much.
So we're going to start with good old Paul Manafort here, because in a July 2017 application the FBI used to get a search warrant against Paul Manafort. It was unsealed Wednesday, as first reported by Reuters. And there's an affidavit attached to the application, and it contains a statement by an FBI agent that said he had reviewed tax returns for a company controlled by Manafort and his wife that showed a $10 million loan from our old friend, Russian oligarch Oleg Deripaska. So, I don't know how you get $10 million out of a Russian oligarch, but I'm sure Manafort does.
Well, the same way he got that $10 million a year contract with him before.
Selling access to the U.S. president?
Well, I mean...
The incoming U.S. president?
Yes. There was also some other interesting stuff in the warrant.
$16 million in loans from a bank out of Chicago.
Well, we already knew about the loans themselves.
Right, but the fact that the $16 million in loans from a bank to a person account for 23.5% of the bank's total capital has to raise so many red flags.
Look, just because a 2016 article
gave a fourth of your bank to a guy.
Look, just because a 2016 article in their trade publication, National Mortgage News, they said that 90% of the bank's lending at the time was directed towards single-family home purchases, mostly through the VA. So
why are they giving $16 million to Manafort? Is he buying a single-family home for $16 million?
Well, turns out that that bank was founded, and the CEO and chairman were all the same guy, Steve Kalk. And Steve Kalk was, sort of, you might say, interested in a position in the Trump administration. He was supposedly interested in becoming the Army Secretary. And, so then he got these loans. Oh, also, we know that his bank got a 7-figure investment from a firm run by Howard Lorber, who's one of Trump's closest friends.
So, a banker wants to get high up in government and gives the campaign manager for someone running for president $16 million. Now, of course, he's going to say he wasn't trying to buy access or buy a position or anything else.
He already left the Trump campaign by then.
Yes. That wonderful shield of I'm not related to that anymore. Yeah,
Yes.
no, except we knew he was.
Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah.
So that's a fun one. Someone should be going to jail for that. And luckily, Manafort already
Probably,
is,
yeah.
actually.
In jail right
He's
now.
sitting there right now where he belongs. I'm all for prison reform, but the prison reform should be take out most of the people who are in there now and
Leave the
replace them with
white-collar
people
criminals.
like Manafort.
Yes.
Like, if we could just, put, 500 Manaforts for every 500, low-end drug offenders that need recovery,
Yeah.
not jail.
Yeah.
That'd be perfect. Let's do that.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic.
However, I don't think that's going to happen
No.
if the Supreme Court keeps going more and more to the right.
No. But there is an interesting other thing that we kind of has been put together. It was bits and pieces that we already knew, but it turns out that, speaking of Oleg Deripaska, you remember a while back we mentioned the thing with Alexei Navalny putting out the video about the secret yacht meeting between Russian Deputy Prime Minister Sergei Prikodko and Oleg Deripaska on his yacht. Well, we now know that they got to the yacht. Very likely got to the yacht because of Deripaska's planes. 2 of his private planes, in fact, specifically.
Of which he's a rich enough man to have multiple private jets.
Yes. And we, of course, flight plans are publicly filed. You can get access to that information. So you can just look up and see where those planes have been going. And we kind of knew some of the details here. In fact, Alexei Navalny talked about some of this in that video about how the Russian deputy prime minister was on a second flight on one of Deripaska's planes. Both of these flights were from Montenegro to Molde. And they were on the same day, both on Deripaska planes. And Deripaska presumably flew from his villa in Montenegro on one of them, and then the deputy prime minister flew on the other. Well, it turns out that the one that the deputy prime minister was on had just arrived earlier from Moscow, where it had flown from Newark, New Jersey, after being in the U.S. for less than 24 hours.
Newark, New Jersey seems like a really good spot to land if you want to talk to people in New York.
Yeah, like Midtown Manhattan.
Like where all of the Trumps and family and friends are.
Interestingly enough, while that plane was en route to Newark in the first place on the evening of August 2nd, at a exclusive cigar bar at 666 Fifth Avenue, the Kushner-owned place, Paul Manafort was meeting with newly indicted Konstantin Kilimnik, by which I mean, of course, that Kilimnik was indicted recently, not that he was indicted at that point. So they were there having a conversation while this plane is en route. And what are they talking about? Why are they having a conversation in the first place? Well, it started a few days earlier when Kilimnik sent an email saying, in part, quote, "I met today with the guy who gave you your biggest black caviar jar several years ago. We spent about 5 hours talking about his story, and I have several important messages from him to you," end quote. Now, they talk in code a lot in their emails.
Black caviar is definitely code for money.
Yes, and then who's the guy that gave him his biggest black caviar jar and all that money? Oh, Oleg Deripaska. The guy that Kilimnik often was the go-between between him
he
and...
represented him a lot, it turns out.
And then while they were arranging the meetup in follow-up emails, Kilimnik said, quote, "I need about 2 hours because it is a long caviar story to tell," end quote. Pretty clearly implying it's about more money.
Yeah.
That's all. That's all. Also, about 3 weeks after the email that Manafort sent to Kilimnik about getting in touch with Deripaska and saying if he needs private briefings, we can accommodate. You might remember that email.
You might remember the whole thing where you can buy you can buy a limited time offer, as in whenever you call me, time with the president.
Yes. So literally, the plane went from I forget where it actually flew to or flew from to get to Newark, but flew into Newark. While it's on its way, Kalimnik and Manafort are having this meeting about the caviar story the 3 weeks or so after the conversation about private briefings.
And then everyone goes and hangs out.
On a private yacht.
Yeah.
That's not suspicious at all.
Let's get on a bug-swept private yacht that we know doesn't have anyone listening, go out into international waters, make sure we're far away, and then talk about it. Yes, there's nothing suspicious about that at all.
No, not
I
at
know
all.
when I'm just hanging out with my friends, I make sure to get as far away from civilization as possible.
Yes.
Good times.
Man.
So this is just more along the wonderful story of Paul Manafort's about to get fucked.
I mean, he's already in the process of getting fucked.
If he sees the light of day again, it'll be because of a pardon. And if
Yeah.
that pardon comes down, oh my God.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think we might have some more things to say on that, on topic of pardons later this episode.
Indeed. So, as we learn more about Deripaska and his property, Manafort there, because
Yes.
it sounds definitely like he is owned.
It certainly seems that way.
We move on to our good friend Michael Cohen, who, at the end of all of this, through all of the evil he has done, through all of the bad people he has been with, could very well also be the bringer of their destruction. He could be the hero we didn't know we needed. We definitely didn't want to be the hero, but turns out to be the hero. Because he recorded everything ever, anywhere, every time, no matter what. And the investigation seems to have all of that.
You know, I'm it's weird because I've been rewatching Futurama recently, and you remember the episode where Richard Nixon's head first comes back, and like it all gets solved when Bender records the conversation, and then there's like the whole
Yep.
joke about the tapes, because the Watergate tapes. And I'm sitting here like I just suddenly reminded of that, and like Michael Cohen is like Bender.
Yes, yes.
He's objectively awful, and yet may have. Through recording conversations,
Yes.
this all down.
So one of the cool things here is that Michael Cohen doesn't know how to use a shredder properly. And so the investigators were able to reassemble 16 pages of shredded documents.
He got the shitty shredder. He didn't get the crosscut.
Oh, he got the Amazon Basics one that was like $20.
Yeah.
That thing doesn't do anything.
Oh, I mean, he also, now they have all of his WhatsApp and Signal stuff.
731 pages of what should have been encrypted text, except he's an idiot.
Mm-hmm.
So that is all going to be fun. The other side of that, which is even more fun, is that Cohen, Trump, and everyone else involved are claiming that most of the stuff that they took from Cohen is covered by special privilege. And it turns out that everyone who's had their eyes on it says, nope, less than
anything.
1% of it maybe. And so, 639 items consisting of 12,543 hard copy pages. Of that, only 13 items were privileged. And out of 291,770 items on 2 phones and an iPad seized from Cohen, only 148 items were privileged. Yes, out of almost 300,000, only 148. That's not 148,000. It's literally 148.
It's 3 orders of magnitude smaller.
So there are still 22,000 documents up for question where, the Trump, group gets to actually kind of look over them, decide what they think is resubmitted as these are, and it'll go back and forth. But even if all 22,000 of those happen, that still means out of somewhere near 300,000 total items, less than 10% of them get covered in privilege, and that's gonna be fun.
Yeah, it really is. And it's great because now that the whole document review thing is winding up, Cohen is losing his current lawyers, which was totally always a planned move. They were only there for document review. At least that's the current story.
He's hiring a new guy.
Yeah.
Specifically Guy.
Yeah, literally.
Guy Petrillo.
Who's former Southern District of New York prosecutor, actually. Our chief of the criminal division there. From 2008 to 2009. So he has lots of experience with people getting prosecuted by the government, specifically involving cases around money laundering and fraud, actually. Also, congressional and special investigations. So
this is right up his alley.
Yeah, definitely the guy you hire for this particular task.
My question is, being that guy, you've obviously got to be pretty well respected in your space. You've got to be pretty well known to land the type of clients you do in those types of cases. You probably have a pretty good record. Why isn't he running from this like it's a trash fire that's about to explode?
Well, we keep hearing...
Because it's a trash fire that's about to explode.
Well, we keep hearing about how, we've heard of a bunch of stuff.
Cohen's willing to talk?
Yeah, Cohen's willing to talk.
So
he
you
feels
bring
betrayed.
So you bring in a lawyer that's a former prosecutor who are really good at people
how to make those
getting...
deals and has friends in the office to get you that deal.
Oh, boy. That makes a lot of sense right there. Look at that. See, we're solving this one here. So he's brought in a former prosecutor to be his lawyer, so he gets the best deal when he starts talking.
That does seem quite likely, especially given he's been going around complaining about how he feels betrayed and he's been loyal to Trump.
He keeps talking about how Trump needs to pay the bills for all of his lawyers, but while I'm sure the bills are astronomical, Trump has actually paid like $230,000 worth of legal costs.
All the stuff involving the Russia investigation and the document review, Trump actually did pay, which is frankly shocking. Trump actually paid something.
So if you're complaining that that he hasn't paid enough and he's already paid $230,000, then your legal fees must be pretty astronomical at that point. Well deserved, but that's kind of crazy. And just keeping up with all the people kind of in Trump's orbit here, we're now down to Roger Stone and Michael Caputo.
Oh yeah, and this is a real fun one. We don't have a lot of detail, or we have a lot of tantalizing hints on this one, but it's a weird story, and we are missing a lot of pieces. We don't know if it's anything yet or not. So we found out, thanks to a new story that came out on the 17th, that Roger Stone and Michael Caputo both had contact in May of 2016 with a thickly accented Russian man calling himself Henry Greenberg, who offered them dirt on Hillary Clinton in exchange for $2 million.
Seems kind of light when you're dealing with the people they were dealing with.
Yeah. Now, so this kind of came to light as a result of, I guess, both of them were interviewed by the special counsel, and the special counsel asked them about this particular contact, and they were like, "Oh, that, right. Wow, we'd totally forgotten about that. It didn't seem important." Now, so the story is that allegedly a business partner of Michael Caputo's, who was a Russian immigrant himself, came to him and said, "Hey, this guy, wants to talk to you. Have the chat." So they arranged this meetup, and the guy says this thing about $2 million for the dirt, and according to Roger Stone, he replied, quote, "You don't understand Donald Trump. He doesn't pay for anything." End quote. Which
sounds about right.
Yeah, no, that actually sounds accurate. So they say, "Oh, that was the whole extent of it. That's why it didn't seem like a big deal." Well, superficially, that sounds like a reasonable explanation, right?
Sure. So people take a lot of meetings during campaign season, and maybe it's with people who might have some interesting opposition research. Sure, okay, and maybe the guy asks for too much, and you realize this is stupid, and you walk away. Or this guy
just wants a meeting, says he has something of interest to you. You're your business partner is the one that's asking you to take the meeting. You go, "Okay, sure, I'll take the meeting. Let's see what this guy has to say." He comes and says something. You're like, "I don't want any part of that. Whatever."
Yeah. Seems normal.
Yeah, that by itself would be pretty reasonable. Well, we also now know, as a result of all this, that in a text message at the time that the meeting was going on, Michael Caputo wrote to Roger Stone, "How crazy is the Russian?" And Stone said that he wanted big money and it was a waste of time. So, again, makes it sound like it's not a big deal, right? It wouldn't be anything. Now,
but then we start to learn a little more about this supposed Henry Greenberg.
Yeah. So it turns out that Greenberg has also gone by the name...
closer to his real name.
Yes. Well, it's a kind of a real name of his, of sorts.
Henry Oknyansky.
Yes, Henry Oknyansky. And in fact, under that name, in a 2015 court filing related to his immigration status, he claimed that he had provided information to the FBI for 17 years after leaving the U.S. in 2000. And that, he had actually had a bunch of the forms saying that he had actually provided substantial benefit and that therefore they should extend his visa. So, but that had stopped years before. That had stopped around 2013. And there was a weird story behind that. But then things get weirder from there because, well, first of all, when they reached out to him about the meeting in the first place, he said that it wasn't true. And then later on, he changed his mind and said, yeah, no, it happened. And then basically described the same sort of meeting as Stone, including down to the reaction of Trump will never pay for anything.
Right. So first denial, then confirmation, then pretty much the same story.
But then he also said that he wasn't actually the only one there at the meeting. He had in fact, it was his friend Alexei, who had allegedly been fired from a job with the Clinton Foundation, who was the one that knew all the dirt and wanted the money and everything, and he was just there to facilitate it.
And Alexei was there at the meeting, is what Henry is claiming.
Yeah, he was the one that was the whole making the claim. In fact,
Stone said he was there with only Henry.
Yes,
that there wasn't another person there.
Now, it gets weirder from there, and it feels strange because I keep having to say that because he's actually not Henry Greenberg. He's not even really Henry Oknyansky. He's actually Gennady Vostrostov, who was
his real name,
career criminal who was a fraudster in the USSR back before the fall of the Soviets. And then after a large score, he left Russia in the early 90s after transferring a large sum of money to the Netherlands, came to the US where he lived for a while, became friends with a bunch of people in Hollywood, was hanging out with movie stars and producers and shit, then got deported after getting arrested a bunch of times for things like assault. And I think there was some... I forget what all the charges were, but he was arrested 3 times on different charges, and finally they just kicked him out. But then it was after he got kicked out that he started doing his stuff for the FBI. And then that fell apart in around 2013. But interestingly, when he was kicked out of the U.S. in 2000, in 2001, the FBI happened to mention his whereabouts to the Russian government.
They were we want that guy. We've wanted that guy for a long time.
We've wanted that guy for 6 years.
Yeah.
So they promptly busted him and arrested him and charged him. But the Russian Interior Ministry's North Caucasus investigation department, the people that arrested him and everything, own spokesman openly doubted that he would ever see trial. He actually, in a public statement quoted by the Moscow Times in 2002, said, quote, "He seems to have powerful patrons and he is very smart." And this was in the part where he was talking about how he didn't think it would ever see trial. And, well, weirdly enough, the whole case seems to have just disappeared. What do you know? And then eventually this guy comes back to the U.S., and now he's, just doing this weird $2 million and just happens to have dirt on Hillary Clinton. He's a Russian guy, but he
sounds like the right kind of guy. If you're looking for a guy to back channel for you, you want a fraudster who's facing time, who you have under your thumb, but who also seems to not care about the world in any real way and just want his own. And you want that guy. You take that guy. You're Putin. You take that guy to the side and you say, all right, here's the deal. You now work for us. And you're going to go do all this fun stuff over in America for us. And then there's no charges. See, it's fair.
Yeah.
He's the right guy for that. And it looks like he became that guy.
That does seem like a plausible explanation here, especially there's this interesting thing. You see, Caputo, of course, says that he had never met this guy before, didn't know him or anything, had nothing to do with him. And it was all his business partner bringing it to him. Well, weirdly though, until earlier this month, actually just a couple of weeks ago, Michael Caputo had a PR firm, Michael Caputo Public Relations Incorporated, that was registered to a P.O. box at a little tiny mail services store at a strip mall in North Miami. And that same store is not a big one. It is a very small one. Had a P.O. box that was also the registered address for another company, Longmore LLC, that was created by Vostrasov,
AKA Henry Greenberg.
yeah, just about a month before that meeting. And then in 2017, he scrubbed his name from all the company filings.
Seems really odd that a little itty bitty shop in just North Miami, hiding out, that no one's ever heard of.
I mean, it's like,
it has a couple hundred clients at most.
Right.
And that suddenly there's P.O. boxes for these two people who don't know each other, who are that powerful in the world.
like they have that connection.
Don't know that I believe
it's
this.
a weird coincidence. It
I
could
believe
be a
they
coincidence.
existed. I just don't believe it's a coincidence.
Oh yeah. I mean, I guess it could be a coincidence. It's just a weird one given all these other things. And then there's the part where
You don't even have to be skeptical to see this one as a problem.
yeah, and then both Roger Stone and Michael Caputo just happened to have very specifically, expressly, publicly stated that they had no contact with anyone who might have been a Russian whatsoever, period, end statement. I mean, literally, in April 2017, Roger Stone told the Washington Post, quote, "I didn't talk to anybody who was identifiably Russian during the 2-year run-up to this campaign. I very definitely can't think of anybody who might have been a Russian without my knowledge. It's a canard." End quote. And then in just this past March, in an interview with Chuck Todd, he said, quote, "I never had any contact with any Russians," end quote. And Michael Caputo specifically said that he told the House Intelligence Committee that same thing. Quote, "I spent my time in front of the committee detailing the fact that I had no contact with Russians, that I never heard of anyone with the Trump campaign talking with Russians, that I was never asked questions about my time in Russia, that I never even spoke to anyone about Russia, that I never heard the word Russia, and we did not use Russian dressing," end quote. So like these people are like expressly stating that there was no chance in hell that they talked to any Russians. And then, how's the Russian? Crazy. He wants money. I think you guys knew that you talked to a Russian, especially because he has a really thick accent by all accounts.
And you called him the Russian.
Yeah.
So he lied to the House committee.
That definitely sounds that way, least unless he lied in public about what he told the House committee.
Which, I don't know, that sounds like perjury to me.
Yeah.
It does.
It does.
Maybe. Good job, Caputo.
Yeah.
And it just, it keeps getting weirder from there. This is just the craziest thing. Like, all these little connections that all come together to paint this picture, in the end, they all lead to one place, Russia.
Yes.
And they all lead to everyone who
they lead to a number of places. Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, the UAE.
But they all end with everyone who was within 5 feet of Trump at any given time for the last few years, somehow being manipulated, controlled, or meeting with Russians who were specifically there for their own good and specifically working against America's good.
Yes.
Same with the Chinese. Now, with the Saudi Arabians and the UAE, maybe they weren't necessarily working against America, but they were definitely working for themselves.
Yes.
And, sure, as a foreigner, if you can get that access, try.
It's not like I blame
Trump's
them
entire
for making the effort.
team was falling for it or was actively involved in it on purpose. Like, who cares? Like, at this point, they were.
Yes.
Every one of them deserves jail time.
Oh, absolutely. And then, it's just amazing how, like, you dig into any one random aspect of the whole thing and you find just all kinds of shit. You remember back a while back, we talked about Joel Zamel of Psy Group, who George Nader brought to meet with Trump Jr. and Eric Prince.
PSY Group.
Yes. At the Trump Tower in August of 2016 on behalf of the princes of UAE and Saudi Arabia. The one with the multi-million-dollar social media campaign unless you believe his lawyer, who insisted publicly, quote, insisted that he, quote, offered nothing to the Trump campaign, received nothing from the Trump campaign, delivered nothing to the Trump campaign, and was not solicited by or asked to do anything for the Trump campaign, end quote. Which makes perfect sense as to why they would have been meeting in Trump Tower in August 2016 with,
Of course, because it had nothing to do with the campaign.
Right.
Of course.
Yeah.
It also makes sense that everyone on the other side of that conversation say, no, that's exactly what we offered.
Yeah. And then just... Oh, yeah, and you might remember that it turns out that George Nader actually paid some amount of money, possibly as much as $2 million, to Joel Zemel after the election.
What was that for?
We don't know. We have absolutely no clue. There is no information that anyone has been able to find out about what that was actually for. Well...
Because the other people in that were offering to pay for that wonderful campaign. So why did they also need $2 million?
Good question.
Good question.
But so it turns out someone did some research to figure out who
Side Group really was.
Yeah. So it turns out that it's an alias for Invop Limited Incorporated in Israel. And Invop is owned fully by a Cyprus company, Ioko Limited, which is in turn owned by a company out of the British Virgin Islands, Protexter Limited. Now, Ioko Limited is managed in Cyprus by a holding company. And that holding company is in turn administered by two Cypriot directors who act as affiliates for two state-owned Russian banks and one large private Russian bank. So the people that are actually administering the holding company managing that one are in bed
Russian
with
bankers.
Russians. And then it turns out that a subsidiary of Protexter Limited, the company that actually owns Ioko Limited, is a Cyprus financial services company who most of their business comes from Russia. 2 of its 6 directors are located in Russia, and according to an April 2018 brochure, the company's activities are concentrated in Cyprus operations and Russia business activities. Then analysis of one of the other subsidiary companies of Protexter, MGTM Financial Services Limited, revealed that it's controlled by the Metropol Group in Moscow, which is a multi-billion-dollar Russian consortium. It's really hard to trace who actually ultimately owns all this shit.
But since it's all giant billionaire Russian stuff, it only exists because Putin allows it to.
Yeah.
He has the control to end or create any of that.
Yeah, and we don't know who actually owns, it appears that the ownership structure of Psy Group stops at the Cyprus branch of Trident Trust. Protexter is listed alongside 15 other subsidiaries of Trident in Cyprus, and Trident does trust and fund administration services, stuff like that. Now, they service thousands of companies around the world, but they act as the shareholder, the branch in Cyprus specifically acts as the sole shareholder for just 16 companies in Cyprus and the British Virgin Islands. And when you look into those 16, it turns out all of them are tied to Russia. Some of them do business with Gazprom. Some of them are controlled by Russian billionaire Mikhail Slepenchuk. A third is partially owned by a Russian living in Russia. Every single one of them. It's almost like Russia is really intimately tied to the operations of this company.
Quite possibly, this could be some part of that. What's that investigation that's going on? The one about collusion.
Yeah.
Where from every angle you can see the Russians are involved.
And
with
just like you dig into
everything
something
that got near the campaign.
Anything random, you get that. Now, it's very interesting, though, that I was talking about Cyprus. Because we have another story that relates to Cyprus, and that might seem kind of weird, given that, Cyprus isn't really that big or prominent or anything. Seems a little strange, right? Well, we've talked a little bit about this one before, or portions related to this anyway, because the Cyprus connection here is only tangential to the main story we're talking about. It's about Wilbur Ross. The... So Wilbur Ross has been on the buying in of a big bank in Cyprus, the Bank of Cyprus, who is actually being investigated by the Mueller investigation. In fact, the bank's biggest shareholder is an affiliate of Victor Vekselberg's Renova Group. You remember our good friend Victor Vekselberg? We've mentioned him a few times. So this, and also that bank is just like notorious. It's got like it's just everyone knows it's used for money laundering nonstop.
Yeah, its name comes up in many money laundering cases.
Every fucking time.
You can search the federal database of cases, and it just keeps coming up and up and up.
And he actually just bought into that bank relatively recently, and like it already had a bunch of Russians on the board of the bank. So but that's actually not why we're talking about him this week. Well,
yeah, that's just ancillarily bad.
Yeah, that's actually just the thing.
The Secretary of Commerce being in bed with a basically Russian-controlled bank in Cyprus.
A Russian-controlled, expressly money laundering bank in Cyprus. That, might be tied to some of this other stuff. Anyway, though, the interesting thing about Ross this week is that it turns out that after he confirmed in November 2017 that he had divested hundreds of millions of dollars representing almost all of his holdings, as he had promised to do, he had lied his ass off, and it gets so much worse. He had not divested shit, basically. And in fact, he's maintained stakes in companies co-owned by the Chinese government, a shipping firm tied to Vladimir Putin's inner circle, the aforementioned Bank of Cyprus, and a big industry player in an industry that Ross is currently investigating.
The automotive industry.
Yeah. Specifically, the International Automotive Components Group. So he has just lied and kept all of these assets in his family, basically, and actively continued to profit off of either directly or indirectly off of his position. And it actually goes and gets worse from there, because you see 5 days before reports surfaced last fall that Ross was connected to cronies of Vladimir Putin through that shipping firm, Navigator Holdings, he who knew about the reporting, or almost certainly did, shorted stock in Navigator Holdings so that he made money on the investment when the prices dropped as a result of the news coming out about his connection.
That sounds like insider trading.
Yeah.
That's what that sounds like.
That is just the level of government ethics we have at this point.
That is our Secretary of Commerce, ladies and gentlemen. That is not just some random intern, not some guy who might have been part of Trump's campaign. That is the Secretary of Commerce. The corruption, the illegal acts, the violations of SEC rules. I mean, it's insane. Yeah,
not even attempting to it's barely even a fig leaf over it. It's just so blatant. They're not even trying to hide it, or if they are, they're just really unbelievably incompetent at it. Which I could believe of Trump, but some of these people, can't be that dumb.
Now we've got John Bolton. And he is now our national security advisor since April.
Yep.
And he's gone to Moscow, a place where, in an op-ed, he wrote that, quote, Trump got to experience Putin looking him in the eyes and lying to him, denying Russian interference in the election. Attempting to undermine America's Constitution is far more than just a quotidian covert operation. It is, in fact, a casus belli, a true act of war, and one Washington will never tolerate, end quote, end quote. And it should be a fire bell in the night, warning about the value Moscow places on honesty, whether regarding election interference, nuclear proliferation, arms control, or the Middle East. Negotiate with today's Russia at your own peril, end quote. So he goes from that...
Just last July,
to after this, or at this meeting, telling Putin, quote, we are most appreciative of your courtesy and graciousness.
And then wouldn't criticize him. And then when reporters were like, but you not that long ago, you were saying these other things, he was like, I don't want to talk about that. Like literally was just like didn't want to refuse to comment on that, sidestepped the issue entirely. And of course, all of that was for the purpose of setting up that Trump-Putin meeting that Trump has been wanting for so long. I wonder why.
Which will happen after the NATO summit in July.
Trump might want a meeting with Putin. Why would he want that?
I don't know. When you're as deep in the lies as Trump is currently and Putin is on the other side of the lies, maybe they need to sit down and get their stories straight. I don't know. I mean,
look, they have their story straight. Just yesterday, Trump tweeted, quote, Russia continues to say they had nothing to do with the meddling in our election. Where is the DNC server and why didn't shady James Comey and the now disgraced FBI agents take and closely examine it? Why isn't Hillary/Russia being looked at? So many questions, so much corruption, end quote. See, he has his story straight.
There's lots of corruption. He's just naming the wrong people. He should name all of his people.
And Russia continues to say they had nothing to do with meddling in our election. And who are you going to believe? Our own intelligence agencies and literally every independent observer with any expertise on the subject whatsoever, or Russia's words? Well, if you're Donald Trump, obviously the answer is Russia's words.
Of course.
I wonder why he might do that.
I am not sure, but, speaking of good old Trump here, he is, of course, talking a lot about the New York Times being, fake and phony.
Yeah, this is about that whole Donald Trump Jr. Trump Tower meeting statement. The first one, the one that originally, Mr. Trump totally had nothing to do with. Oh, by the way, he did totally dictate that.
Yeah. He says it's irrelevant because it was to the New York Times, which is a phony, failing New York Times. It's just phony.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter that, I did that thing that I said I didn't do.
No, sure. We all lied to you about whether I made up that statement, which was itself a lie. And then we told you that lie. And then it doesn't matter that we lied to you because you publish lies because we told you lies.
Wow. That's some logic right there.
Yeah.
And then on Thursday, he tweets, quote, when is Bob Mueller going to list his conflicts of interest? Why has it taken so long? Will they be listed at the top of his $22 million report? And what about the 13 angry Democrats? Will they list their conflicts with Crooked H? Obviously, Hillary. How many people will be sent to jail and ... persecuted on old and or totally unrelated charges? There was no collusion. There was no obstruction of the no collusion. And what is going on in the FBI and DOJ with Crooked Hillary, the DNC, and all of the lies? A disgraceful situation.
Now,
the disgraceful situation is exactly that tweet.
Yeah. Also, I just want to point out that literally the same day that he tweeted that, he also tweeted, quote, in recent days, we have heard shameless attacks on our courageous law enforcement officers. Extremist Democrat politicians have called for the complete elimination of ICE. Left-wing activists are trying to block ICE officers from doing their jobs and publicly posting their home addresses, putting these selfless public servants in harm's way. Blah, blah, blah. These radical protesters want anarchy, but the only response they will find from our government is law and order. So he complains about people attacking, shameless attacks on our courageous law enforcement officers, and how the only response we'll find from our government is law and order. Literally just hours after complaining about law enforcement, attacking them, to undermining their credibility, suggesting that, they're in the wrong, that it's disgraceful, and complaining that his friends are getting charged for crimes that they actually committed, persecuted on old and or totally unrelated charges. He's not saying that they're not guilty. He's tacitly admitting they did it.
Yeah, it's mind blowing, and he the things he says and things he can get away with saying. At the G7 summit, he told leaders, quote. He told leaders about the upcoming NATO summit, quote, will be an interesting summit. NATO is as bad as NAFTA. It's much too costly for the U.S. He literally called NATO as bad as NAFTA.
Which he has expressly said, look at anything he's ever said about NAFTA for his opinions on that. It's not exactly nuanced.
This guy, man, this is our president, ladies and gentlemen.
And now he's going to go have that summit with NATO and then go have his summit with his boss, Vladimir Putin.
Amazing. So The Supreme Court, lots of news about them in the last, actually, their whole last session, but the last week especially.
Oh, man, the last week was nuts.
So, I mean, we start with the Muslim ban because that's what it is.
Yeah.
And in the Supreme Court case of Trump v. Hawaii, the Supreme Court ruled 5-4 this week to uphold the travel ban against several predominantly Muslim countries. And yet again, the travel ban basically talking about, the need for more scrutiny, better ways to scan these people, better ways to prevent the bad ones from getting in, and somewhat justified in talks and interviews and whatnot, by 9/11. But none of this goes right at Saudi Arabia, where almost all of the people who did 9/11 are from.
Yeah.
It's not on the list.
No.
Funny.
And in fact, the Supreme Court based their ruling. Well, they basically covered a couple of different things. Important points though were that basically they didn't want to strike it down because it would only be, you can only strike it down if there is no legitimate state interest in the policy. It's inexplicable by anything but animus. And so all they had to do was show that they had something that they believed it would accomplish. And so there is persuasive evidence that there is a legitimate grounding in national security concerns, quite apart from any religious hostility. And there was a worldwide review process undertaken by multiple cabinet officials. And like, this was totally legit. And then what they ignore is that report was 17 pages long for the whole world. Yeah. And didn't even consistently apply their own criteria for deciding which countries to include.
We have more notes today for this episode of the show than that report was long.
Yeah, literally.
Mind-blowing.
And yet they concluded that therefore there was, it was explicable by something other than animus, despite having, all these statements from Trump about how he wanted a Muslim ban and blah, 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 Muslim ban and calling for a Muslim ban. And this is the same court that just weeks ago decided in favor of Masterpiece Cake Shop and their suit against the Colorado Civil Rights Commission because 2 of the 7 members of the commission made comments that allegedly, quote unquote, cast doubt on the fairness and impartiality of the commission's adjudication of Phillips' case, end quote. They just blatantly...
They don't care about the Constitution at all at this point.
They don't even care about their own recent past rulings.
It's amazing. Simply amazing.
Never mind anything like about, sane standards of jurisprudence or anything. When 2 of their own rulings in short order have the same people take essentially opposite positions on the 2 cases, there is a real problem.
And of course, that's followed up by Janus v. AFSCME, which basically kneecaps unions.
All public unions, at least. Yeah. And, implicitly will therefore proceed to be used to undermine the power of unions in general and therefore go after private unions, because that's how this always goes.
The conservatives love to do.
Yes.
The conservatives and the Republicans hate unions because they empower the workers and... give them collective bargaining and all the other fun things that actually lead to proper health benefits, proper pay levels, cost of living increases, and all the other things as an employee you need to survive. And the way this one works is basically they've made it where it's okay for you to receive all the benefits of your company having a union, all the things that union might be doing for you, but it's not okay for you to be forced to pay into the union. So basically, you can work at a union shop, a place where everyone else is unionized, but not pay your dues, but still get the benefits of what that union is doing for you, which will, of course, slowly defund unions as less people give money to it since they're not forced to.
And, of course, give the union less bargaining power since it doesn't represent as many people, since those people are choosing not to pay in, because why would they pay in when they get all the benefits without paying in?
Which will kill the unions.
Of course.
Which is exactly what the conservatives want. Because, again, they want to concentrate the money in the hands of the few.
The crazy thing to my mind is the basis of the court's ruling here. Because they said that it's unconstitutional to require workers represented by public sector unions to pay their fair share of the costs of such representation. because they are attempting to lobby government in ways that the people may not agree with. That's speech and, political spending. And so, therefore, even though there's already all these legal things requiring unions to not be able to spend any of them, like when unions collect their dues, those dues, and especially if you're taking just the fair share stuff for people that want to opt out of actually being a full union member but are getting represented anyway, what happens is they are not allowed to use any of that money for actual like political lobbying. They have to. They have to.
That's
very
totally
carefully,
for operations.
Right. It's 100% for union operations. But because in this case, the union is, the union for employees of the government, therefore it's trying to influence the government. And therefore they basically ruled that it's like political speech. And then there's already like exemptions that you can use. Like if you have a religious objection to being in a union, you can instead donate the amount that would be your union dues to a church or a religious organization. Like there are already like ways around, and they're just like pointlessly saying, no, that's still, even though, yes, they're just doing literally the job of the union itself, they're doing it to the government, and therefore they're lobbying. That's speech. Like,
no.
Fuck you. That's bullshit.
Yeah, this is literally just a way for the rich and powerful to hurt unions, and they've done a great job of it. Good job, Supreme Court. And we follow that one up, of course, with the pregnancy crisis centers, which, of course, are places trying to force the pro-life and religious narrative on anyone looking to get an abortion.
And these places are disgusting.
Disgusting, lying liars who lie.
Yeah, they expressly provide intentionally deceptive advertising and counseling services that outright just lie. They will lie about the effectiveness of contraception. They'll lie about the safety of abortion.
They will do whatever it takes to convince you.
Yeah, they will just outright tell you anything.
So in California, they passed a law saying you can't do that, and you actually also have to post all the alternatives, right?
They didn't even say you couldn't do that. All you had to do was, if you were a licensed pregnancy crisis center, you had to post notices saying that free or low-cost abortion, contraception, and prenatal care are available to low-income women through public programs, and then there would be a phone number as well for more information.
That's it.
That's all.
That's it. So that's it. Dead simple.
If you weren't a licensed clinic, you didn't even have to do that. You only had to post the notice saying that you weren't a licensed clinic.
And somehow this case made it all the way to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, because you see, they sued saying that they were having their right to free speech violated by forcing them to display messages at odds with their beliefs. Now, this would be like if I ran a business and like I said that posting the labor law notices on the like wall that all businesses are required to have, is against my religious beliefs, and the court going, "Yep, that seems fair."
So, in the Supreme Court continues to get worse list here. We of course, I just want to move right on to Kennedy.
Oh yeah, that's
Anthony Kennedy. The swing vote is retiring. He's a Reagan appointee, and I don't agree with his politics. I don't agree with a lot of his stances on the issues. What I've always agreed with good old Anthony Kennedy there is that he was the swing vote. That when it came right down to, is this constitutionally correct or not, he voted right on those points.
Or at least he legitimately put some sort of, beliefs above politics.
He did. And the current batch of really hard right-leaning Supreme Court justices do not.
No, not at all.
They do whatever it takes to shove their ideals down the court's throat and thus down America's throat. And with Anthony Kennedy leaving, Justice Kennedy leaves a big hole right in the middle, because you've got your people on the far left, you've got your people on the far right, and he was that swing vote.
Well, it's more that with the current makeup of the court, you have the people on the moderate left, you have the people on the far right, and then you had him. Yeah,
so now where we're stuck is President Trump might actually get to put someone else on the Supreme Court. There is a high possibility that he pulls this off.
I mean, who's going to stop him?
Yes, because they have control of the Senate, and
Yes.
so they can allow it through. They can take his wonderful nominee and just run him right through, or her, of course. And this is bad. This will lead to an unbalanced court that does not represent the majority of America, who, mind you, in multiple previous elections, in fact, I would say four of the last 5 elections, I believe the national popular vote came down Democratic, even though the Republican won. Including the last one where Hillary, who I hated with a passion, still won the national popular vote, although not winning in the Electoral College. So the will of the American people definitely seems to fall to the left a little.
And yet,
And the court is now going to fall extremely to the right.
and in a very partisan fashion, along with the similarly partisan Republican-controlled House, Senate, and presidency.
Yes.
They now control all three branches of the federal government completely.
Yes, they do. They do. And that is really bad for our country. And here we go with they're already now working up their plans to take down Roe v. Wade as soon as they get their new nominee in. There's actually a good article out on CNN today explaining exactly what they're planning. And so you can just expect all hell to break loose at this point.
Now, that Kennedy retiring wasn't a coincidence. Trump actually was behind the scenes making a lot of plays there, making sure family members of his were in comfortable positions, stuff like that. It also turns out that Trump has a weird connection with Anthony Kennedy. See, Anthony Kennedy's son, Justin Kennedy, was the global head of real estate capital markets division at Deutsche Bank at the point at which Deutsche Bank was the only bank that would do any business with Donald Trump. And he basically personally approved Donald Trump for something in the neighborhood of $1 billion in loans, and was a close business associate of Trump's during that period. And so he actually is like kind of at least sort of a family friend. And in fact, when Trump went to Congress early on after he was inaugurated, he went to talk with Anthony Kennedy afterwards, and the reporters that were nearby overheard part of the conversation at least, and quoted him as saying, quote, "And say hello to your boy, special guy." So, yeah, Trump was behind the scenes there trying to get Kennedy to retire so that he could appoint another justice before the midterm elections.
Which, of course, the Republicans fought off with Obama's nominee,
Right.
Merrick Garland, and did not even see confirmation hearings.
Right.
And all their arguments were you should allow the people to vote on this one through their election votes. And so the Democrats now are arguing that you should do the same, and this should wait till after the midterms.
Which, I mean, it's funny to point to the inevitable hypocrisy of the Republicans in that, but that's actually not the right argument to be making. It's not that it's entirely unfair given the fact that they literally did
Just
make
did it,
exactly
yeah.
that. But the thing that is far more important here is that Donald Trump is part of the subject of an investigation into very serious possible crimes. And there are all kinds of reasons why he could appear in cases going in front of the Supreme Court in the very near future. And those are very important cases. He should not be able to appoint a justice who might be potentially ruling on those cases.
That should not be allowed, and I don't think there's much we're going to be able to do to stop it.
No.
Mitch McConnell and people like Paul Ryan and everyone else will just go right with the party line.
I want to say that, there's one person that I think needs some extra focus on them to remind them of, like, what the situation is. Actually, maybe a couple people, but one of them is out of the picture, basically. So the one I want to focus on here is Jeff Flake, because you remember he's been talking a big fight against Trump and about how, this is unacceptable conduct and blah, blah, blah. And look, for all of the big talk he's given, he should have enough respect for the rule of law to not want a guy to be appointing justices when they quite plausibly will in the near future be ruling on cases involving him. That if Jeff Flake meant a single word he said, he should categorically refuse to vote for any Trump nominee, at least until the Mueller investigation is resolved. And I mean, since he's leaving Congress anyway, that might just mean not voting at all until he's gone.
Wow. I don't think that's going to be possible.
No,
I don't
I
think
don't see
Flake actually has a backbone.
No,
I think he was grandstanding, and
I think he has a very accurate last name.
Yes. So by all means, reach out to your senators, your representatives, and everyone else and yell and scream at the top of your lungs. But it looks for all intents and purposes like Trump is going to be able to put another person on. And of course, you know, if he actually gets through 2020 and gets reelected, there could be 2 more. And that could mean that we end up with like a 7-2 on the court.
At which point they can. I mean, I guess it doesn't even matter at that point.
No, because 5-4 is enough.
Yeah.
It only takes a majority, a simple majority.
Yeah, and once you have that, you can do anything.
So get ready, everybody, because here comes the far right forcing all kinds of fun things down our throat based on their various Christian views.
And unchristian views.
Depending, the things that they claim are Christian views.
Yes.
That any actual true Christian probably would scoff at, but there we are.
Yes.
So now we get to the Democratic primaries, where a Bernie Sanders supporting Democratic Socialist 28-year-old bartender beats Joe Crowley. That right there is amazing and everything we need in this world.
Right?
Give me another 50 of her in Congress. Thank you.
And what makes it even better is the fact that something that we don't see very often happened. Despite him outraising her 10-1, she actually won by almost 15 points.
So we're talking about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and she won the seat away from incumbent Representative Joe Crowley in New York there.
For the moment, she won the primary.
In the primary, yeah. But, I mean, this is a very Democratic seat.
I don't see I seriously don't see him, like, winning a third-party campaign.
No, if he comes in as independent or anything else, I mean, he's gonna lose by a lot. I mean, she took the primary by 15 points. It
was a very low vote total, though.
Sure, but losing 15 points between primary and election time, that's you got to work hard to lose that many points. So we are probably going to see a 28-year-old Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in the House there, which will make multiple Bernie-crats, as friends of mine are calling them at this point, show up in our House, in our Congress, and I just have to think they're only good can come from that.
Yeah. Although, speaking of good that came from it, we got some comedy out of all this when Donald Trump tweeted out, quote, "Wow, big Trump hater Congressman Joe Crowley, who many expected was going to take Nancy Pelosi's place, just lost his primary election. In other words, he's out. That is a big one that nobody saw coming. Perhaps he should have been nicer and more respectful to his president," end quote. Now, mind you, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez hates Trump 10 times more and actively supports impeaching him.
Yeah, so the nicer person didn't win that one to you, Trump, there.
No, you do not seem to have understood how that went.
And in a continuing slide of the Democratic apparatus, the evil incumbents, people like Wasserman Schultz and all the rest, in a wonderful slide of their actual control over their party, Dana Balter, the first-time candidate and visiting assistant teacher professor at Syracuse University, who was a local with big support of local Democrats in New York's 24th congressional district, managed to easily defeat Juanita Perez Williams, who was brought in by the DCCC when they realized that Dana Balter was definitely not with the establishment Dems and was way too progressive for them. And they actually went against Balter, put out opposition research against Balter, did everything they could to fight Balter with a candidate that they brought up and funded. And the progressive candidate still beat them and beat them handily.
And just to show how bullshit it was that Juanita Perez Williams was recruited into the race by the party, literally like days before the Democratic Party recruited her to enter the race, she had donated $250 to Balter. She would literally donate it to her, and then they'd like show up and were like, no, we want you to run. You're one of our people. You're reliable. And she was like, all right, well, I guess I'm running.
That's amazing. How do we get here?
A long, complicated series of awful, awful events.
So where we are now is the incumbent Democrats keep fighting back against the progressive, wave that's coming through their party and keep losing.
Yeah, we had another one even with Ben Jealous, the former NAACP president, and some other stuff, including taught at Princeton University's Woodrow Wilson School and such, defeated a significantly more conservative Democrat and Prince George County executive, Rushern Baker, who was endorsed by people like Martin O'Malley, Paris Glendening, the Attorney General of Maryland, Brian Frosch, Chris Van Hollen, the junior senator from Maryland, and the Washington Post. Whereas, Ben Jealous got, I don't know if you heard about some of those endorsements, but Bernie Sanders and a bunch of interesting ones, including a number of politicians, several senators. I think Cory Booker. I think there was a third senator as well, but there was a fair amount. And then also like Dave Chappelle for some reason.
Just randomly.
But yes, regardless, I mean, it wasn't like Rushern Baker is, the worst corporate Democrat, even if, relatively centrist Democrat, but not super centrist, but relatively.
But still, the progressives are winning.
Ben Jealous still won that. So yeah, like...
So let's keep that up.
Right?
I believe that's 17 of them now, from one of the posts I read online. So that's a good count going forward.
Yeah, it's a good start.
So of course, well, the EPA sucks. Climate change is real. All this fun stuff. There's a lawsuit that's been tossed out.
Two of them actually, by different cities.
Climate change lawsuits where San Francisco and Oakland both brought suit. Stating basically that the companies that are causing climate change need to be responsible for what they're doing. And the district judge, Judge Alsup, basically tossed the cases out, stating that this is not the proper venue to decide something so large, and that needs to happen in the legislative branch, that the Congress basically needs to solve this one. I can't. And that's a good way to dodge an important problem.
Especially when, the legislative and executive branches have specifically failed to address the problem. And in fact, the courts previously in Massachusetts versus EPA said that the EPA needed to regulate CO2 as a pollutant. That was actually required under the Clean Air Act, and get your shit together. And then they still haven't.
Yeah, because they don't care.
And so basically these cities brought a suit to try and remedy a specific harm being done to them because of that failure. And on the basis that these companies are creating a public nuisance by their actions and therefore have to be liable for the impacts. And the courts go, well, really, Congress should be dealing with that. Well, yeah, but they haven't. Isn't that what the courts are supposed to do? Fix the problems where the law isn't, or where like the Constitution isn't being followed and there's actual like harm? Like, isn't that the whole point?
It is, but yeah, this
just
is
not the federal district court, apparently.
Apparently. So now we're on to the trade war, which is, of course, affecting America far worse than anyone else.
Well, yeah.
As it's, Trump's version of economics, which is flawed, as you might be able to tell by his multiple bankruptcies, as he doesn't know what to do or understand the basics of finance. Here we are with $50 billion worth of tariffs against China and tons of tariffs against Europe, Mexico, and Canada on steel imports and all of this fun stuff. And we end up with the companies that Trump once touted as doing so well after his tax breaks for corporations actually saying, we're going to have to lay people off, move some stuff overseas because of your tariffs. And so Harley Davidson now is basically saying, we're in a world of hurt with these tariffs. You're killing us. And Trump is responding, hold on, it'll get better. When nobody believes that to be true.
Well, I mean, the hilarious thing is he's not really all that wrong. I mean, well, Harley Davidsons are overpriced trash anyway, and people are paying, disgusting markup on them anyway. So that extra like $2,000 to the cost of a Harley probably isn't going to make that much difference to them because they're already being sold to suckers that overpay for their motorcycles by insane amounts anyway. But
no, what
the hilarious part, though,
what Mac is saying there is, any of you Harley Davidson lovers, come at him. Obviously, that's what I heard. So just to interpret for you,
I'm sorry you like awful motorcycles.
Are you saying you're a fan of a certain South Park episode?
I mean, I'm not, but that episode was kind of funny.
So yes,
but
there is so much wrapped up in this, trade war here that is problematic. Like, because on one side you have to agree with Trump on one thing, that trade has been very unbalanced, that the trade situation for the last 40 or so years has led to the destruction of almost complete sectors of the U.S. economy, and that it would be great if we had all those jobs back. Sure, great. I can agree to all of those things.
Yeah.
It's 3 big things I just agreed to with you, Trump. Here's the problem. The problem is that we do not have any infrastructure left to rebuild that at this point, all the way down to we do not have the trained personnel to do the type of work to make that type of material, from steel up in any kind of quantity at any kind of volume to replace what we're getting, steel, aluminum, you name it, all of it, from overseas. So there is a multi-decade retraining and rebuilding of the workforce necessary before we ever get to start redoing all of that stuff here. Or somehow you got to convince a bunch of foreigners to come here and do the work for us, which I don't think is the point. And based on your immigration tactics, I don't think is really where you are in your head. So the president here is just, wrong in every possible way. You can't just say, we need to do all this at home, and then magically, suddenly, all of the human beings with the skill sets to do this at home appear. It takes years of training and study, in some of these fields, apprenticeship even, to get to the point where you're good enough to do this. It takes companies building, getting to massive size. It takes... none of these things we have. You can't just suddenly say, China, you can't ship us steel anymore. We're going to do it ourselves. And then magically we have the capacity to fill the demand. No, that's not how this works at all.
Also, there's another problem with the fundamental premise of what he sees as the problem. Because while he may have identified that, hey, there are these bad outcomes that we've witnessed, he's seemingly, like many people, under the impression that the reason that these trade deals have had these outcomes that we would see as negative are because these other countries demanded them for their own interests, and that really it's us against those countries, and they're the ones that have been screwing us. It isn't. Those trade deals are overwhelmingly the product of what the U.S. wanted in almost every case. Overwhelmingly, the U.S. are the ones that wrote those deals.
We were working towards the tech sector, towards the knowledge sector, towards the consulting sector, towards... Basically, America wanted to become management and let everyone else become the grunt workers.
Yeah.
And they worked it in those trade deals. That was on purpose.
Yes. And the people that wanted that were the people that were already wealthy, and some of them are in America, some of them aren't in America, but they have maybe multinational businesses that are in America, or they're in America and
own
they have
heavy stakes of American companies,
right? Or they're in a partnership with an American company, or any number of possibilities there. No, the people that screwed us on these trade deals aren't these other countries. They're our own wealthy.
Yeah. The 1% of America made these deals on purpose to better enrich themselves.
Yeah.
You also run into the fact that we, do just... This sounds weird just saying it in these exact words, but too many people in America actually go to college. There are other types of schooling necessary in order to fill these types of jobs and to fill the various trades that you just aren't going to learn at a Harvard. And we have moved to a point where everyone just thinks that college is a requirement of moving forward with life, of just it's generically needed. It is a thing you have to have. And it isn't for a lot of good paying jobs with great benefits if those sectors hadn't died.
I think the problem is people confuse two different things. They confuse college as being a thing that is vocational training,
which it is not.
It is not supposed to be, or at least university is not.
Yeah.
It is not vocational training. It is education. You are supposed to be. It's supposed to make you a better, more informed person who is better capable of understanding the world and making good decisions and like participating in society. It's not supposed to be about just getting you a better job. If you are going to college for that, it's fundamentally the wrong reason. And in America, we seem to have lost sight of that very completely. I mean, I am all for if everyone wants to go to university, by all means, I support that. But it should not be about getting a better job. It should be about making you a better person.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to be less ignorant on many different topics, if you want to learn how parts of the world work, if you want to go get history degrees or any of the liberal arts, fine. But, don't go get a liberal arts degree expecting that that's what's going to be, your life's work. Very few people go and get a liberal arts degree and then get a high-paying job that isn't teaching more liberal arts. So, I mean, all the anthropologists I know teach anthropology. It's a vicious circle. Go and, although some of them are great friends of mine, so don't be insulted. I'm just stating the facts here. That, if you want training in real work that would somehow replace some of these massive trade deficits for us, you need vocational training. You need apprenticeship training. You need
grade school.
You don't need ITT Tech.
No.
But you need real vocational schools, which actually exist.
And I mean, vocational training is done at a huge number of community colleges in the like.
Absolutely. We just haven't had enough people going through those various venues to have any kind of a workforce of any size capable of doing anything about that side of the trade debt.
Well, I mean, of course, anyone, even vaguely in, I think, our age group, I'm not sure how much of this you saw personally with your personal life history, but people in our age group very usually grew up with everyone around them telling them that, you don't respect the guy that's the AC repairman. You don't respect the guy that's there to fix your fridge. Those are just,
those are people who couldn't get better jobs.
Right. And, if you want a real job, you got to go to college. So like,
right.
There's been this long thing where, the people that are now blaming all the students for having gotten a bullshit degree and expecting they'd get a decent job are the same people that told them to do that in the first place.
Right.
So that's kind of part of how we got there, but it's also kind of funny to watch, the hypocrisy there.
One of my favorite quotes from all of this does come from Chinese President Xi Jinping, where he told a group of American and European CEOs, quote, "In the West, you have the notion that if somebody hits you on the left cheek, you turn the other cheek. Quote, in our culture, we punch back." And that was, of course, in reference to the trade tariffs and the fact that China will be putting equal or bigger tariffs on us for doing so.
And taking lots of steps to make their own economy less vulnerable to any sort of conflict with the U.S. For example, reducing tariffs on imports from other countries so that they can bring in the soybeans that they want without having to pay the tariff prices after they impose tariffs on U.S. soybeans that will screw over Ohio, Iowa, Missouri, and Indiana, among others.
Let's talk about Wells Fargo.
Ooh, yeah.
We're going to talk about Wells Fargo. Now, everyone knows when Wells Fargo gets brought up these days, it's about all the wonderful things they're doing for low-income communities.
Yeah,
and
look, they made some mistakes in the past.
But they're great people now.
Yeah, they're fixing all of that, is what I've been told.
I want to live in that universe, but I don't. Instead, whenever Wells Fargo is brought up, it's because, again, it's been found that they did something horrible. It is, of course, nicely called misconduct.
Yes.
But what they actually did was steal somewhere around $1 million, basically, from small business mom and pop investors by convincing them to put their money through high fee brokerage products, debt products, that would make Wells Fargo a lot more money than the things that these small mom and pop shops actually needed. And Wells Fargo has now been forced to pay a $4 million penalty over this. And the bank must return all $930,377 of ill-gotten gains, plus the $178,064 of interest they had earned on that money. So every bit of it is going back now, which is great. Although, again, they should have maybe not taken it in the first place. And again, I have this real problem where banks making that level of money off of doing this bad stuff just get told, give the money back and we'll look the other way. That doesn't teach anything. That just teaches them to keep trying to get away with it.
Hey, I mean, at least this time they had to actually pay, the whole identified amount and then a $4 million penalty on top of that. So
sure, but for a bank worth billions and billions,
sure,
$4 million is a rounding error.
And if they get caught 1 out of 10 times on one of these, and each time they have to pay, 4 times what they made, well, they still made 5 of those as profit, so they don't give a shit.
They need to be punished a lot harder than they had. Now, the $1 billion that they had to pay for the insurance and mortgage practices, that was a fine that could hit the bottom line there.
Yeah, too bad. I guarantee you they made more off of that whole thing.
Exactly, and so someone should have gone to jail.
A lot of someone's probably.
That's the only way companies like this are going to learn. That it's because, for one, all the people at the top who made the decisions that led to that $1 billion fine, that $1 billion fine didn't come out of their bonuses.
Nope. And you know what?
In fact, every one of them got bigger bonuses that year.
And all of them made decisions that could be described as part of a criminal conspiracy, because they coordinated.
Are we looking at a RICO case here? Oh wait, no, we're not, because they're not getting charged.
Yeah, that isn't how this ever actually gets enforced, even though that's literally what they were doing.
Simply mind-blowing. And then we move on to AT&T and our ever-growing account of media consolidation.
Oh yeah, this is great. Now they're just gonna offer everything, because they're gonna all own the entire chain of media production and distribution. They're going to be AT&T now that,
they have their own network for the phones. They have their own cable system for home. They now own the means of production by buying out Time Warner.
They're going to offer a new streaming video service soon, thanks to their acquisition of Time Warner.
They own a gigantic back library from that purchase. That got them HBO, Warner Bros., which of course is 100 years worth of stuff.
Yep.
And Turner Broadcasting System, which not only got them all of TBS's stuff, which is a lot, surprisingly, especially the Turner Classics.
Yeah.
They own all the old movies, but they also get CNN, which I'm not happy about AT&T owning CNN.
No.
That doesn't sound right to me.
No. And then, of course, now that net neutrality's gone, they can do whatever the fuck they want, right? So,
well, they say they're not going to.
Oh, well, they say they're not, except AT&T's new streaming video service is going to be free for AT&T mobile customers who subscribe to unlimited data plans, and $15 a month for everyone else. And AT&T just revamped its 2 unlimited mobile plans this week, raising the entry-level plan by $5 a month and removing the free HBO perk.
Which basically costs them then the same amount as if you were paying for it outside.
Yeah. And then basically they're jacking up an administrative fee that doesn't actually do, there's no justification for the fee.
No, all those fees should be legal.
They're just going to make an extra $800 million a year by raising that fee. But yeah, they're going to be basically making it so that you don't get the free access to HBO, even though they'll own it. But they won't give you what they're currently offering in terms of, it doesn't use your any of your bandwidth cap to stream HBO.
So we're going to end up with a streaming service that's free if you have AT&T's service for your phone, which includes a lot of things that people are going to want, from TV shows to everything else, to movies, to just everything. And then if you're on another service, you owe $15 for it. That I can see is, you know what? Okay, sure. You have content and you wanna bundle. I can see some bundling. I'm not going to complain too hard there. My fear is, of course, based around net neutrality. That if I'm watching their stuff on my AT&T service, man, does that work great. And if somehow Netflix keeps buffering, that's what I see coming. And while they say they're not
you'll have your upgraded package that allows you to use Netflix.
Right. You have to pay that $15 that, they're not charging you. Now you suddenly have to pay it, but that's for the video streaming package, which lets you do Netflix and Hulu and all the others.
That's okay. The cost of your Netflix will also increase by 50% because they'll insist on taking a 50% cut from Netflix.
Of course, for delivery.
Yes. So they'll double dip there, and for things that are 100% unjustified.
So get ready for all of that to cost more and be worse.
Yeah.
Thanks to media consolidation.
Woo.
There were good reasons why it was hard in the past for media to consolidate this strongly until recent administrations started changing all the rules. And we're going to get to see the results of that very soon. Coming to a theater near you, media consolidation.
Coming to your home in pocket.
So let's get to the biggest subject of the last couple weeks, which is immigration. Here we are. ICE should be defunded. Trump is mad that people are saying that. And everyone is complaining that, but some of these facilities were built under Obama. And sure, they were. They were built for very specific reasons, such as overflow, such as we don't have room for all of these people, or that time when a lot of them were coming across with some diseases related to things that we needed to keep them away for a second.
They were intended for unaccompanied minors. Yeah, these were kids that were coming across the border without any adults.
Family. There was nothing about family separation on our side. They were showing up here without family, and again, it was also all about the fact that we just didn't have room to put them anywhere else. So they put something together. It was quick. It was nothing to do with the zero tolerance policy. It wasn't on purpose. They didn't want to be doing this. Whereas Trump's team is actively doing this. They are filling them on purpose. They are separating the kids on purpose. Whereas Obama's version of this was, we don't have much of a choice here. What are we going to do? Trump's version is, how do we fill these things?
Yeah, and expressly they're using words talking about how it's a deterrent. Like the whole point of it is to make people not want to come by making it, awful and miserable. I'm at a loss for words to describe how evil that is.
Just plain evil. Just plain evil. And here we are, 2,300 children separated from their parents
in 2 months.
Authorities haven't really come up with any way to track them. Took them away without even getting proper names or identification, and just stuck them in other facilities. Some parents have no idea how they're going to be able to find their children again.
They have no
some of these
plan for
kids
reuniting
have
them.
no ID or no way, because they weren't old enough to be able to be communicative enough to actually be able to then tell authorities, my parents' names are this, we were taken here. They don't have that ability. So here they are, lost to the system.
Yeah.
The only way this works is if you bring everyone together at one location and do it there. You can get it to the point where the easily identifiable ones get weeded out, they get handed back, and slowly over time you end up with parents in one corner, kids in the other corner, and they start to find their children. Mm-hmm. Kids recognize their parents.
Yes.
And the one facility solution to this is the only way that is any reunification is actually going to be functional. I don't think they're going to do that. I think they're going to instead continue to fill them up. In fact, it's funny because DHS Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen actually initially tried to claim that this wasn't even happening, that this wasn't policy and we weren't doing it, before finally changing her tone and saying that, that what was it? Here's the bottom line. It's no longer ignoring the law. The children are not being used as a pawn. And basically admitting totally that we are doing it, but it's just because we're enforcing the law. And of course, hinting, oh, by the way, that law wasn't ours. That was here before we got here. Which, fine. I'm not going to fight that point. That stuff was there before you got there,
except the part about it being the law, because it actually wasn't the law.
Yeah. But the stuff was on the books where they could have done this.
Yes.
It was the zero tolerance policy put out by Trump's administration that, made this possible, though, made this actual law, made this a thing they can enforce at this scale. And, of course, Trump blames the Democrats because he wants to shift blame every time he can.
Yep.
And anyone who supports Trump is dumb enough to believe this.
Apparently.
Quote, let's see, Trump tweets, quote, Democrats can fix their forced family breakup at the border by working with Republicans on new legislation for a change. This is why we need more Republicans elected in November. Democrats are good at only three things: high taxes, high crime, and obstruction. Sad, end quote. So he's blaming them for their forced family breakup, which is not true at all. This is absolutely the Republicans doing this.
And he tacitly admitted that was a bullshit excuse when he actually signed the executive order stopping the halting the zero tolerance policy for now. Because according to him, he then took credit for it. Like, I did it. I stopped the whole thing that the Democrats started. Well, then I guess the Democrats weren't the ones stopping it from happening. Now, were they, jackass?
Yeah.
Of course, it wasn't happening before you came into office. This specific thing wasn't. So I guess they didn't start it either.
Yeah.
And so it sounds kind of like you started it,
and you
blamed them, and then stopped it. Well, sort of. And didn't actually fix the damage already done and might recontinue it at any point.
So he's using Germany as one of his examples of places where the immigrants have led to crime going up. And he says in a quote on the 18th on Twitter, quote, the people of Germany are turning against their leadership as migration is rocking the already tenuous Berlin coalition. Crime in Germany is way up. Big mistake made all over Europe in allowing millions of people in who have so strongly and violently changed their culture, end quote. Now, that's actually just not true. In fact, in May, Interior Minister Horst Seehofer, who actually leads the anti-immigration forces in Chancellor Angela Merkel's cabinet, released data indicating that Germany's crime rate had fallen to its lowest level since 1992.
AKA reunification of East and West Germany.
Yeah, since reunification, this is the lowest crime has ever been. So literally the exact opposite of what Trump said is the truth, which turns out to be more common than not.
Yeah, actually, if you just take any random thing that he says and assume the exact opposite is true, you're going to be right more often than you'd be right by assuming that the thing he said was true.
It's just crazy.
And then, these camps are bad enough, and all of the people trying to pretend like it's not as bad as it plainly is. And they're not concentration camps because they killed millions in the concentration. No, those were the extermination camps. I mean, yes, they also killed people in the concentration camps. They also killed people in villages and towns and pretty much everywhere because they killed everyone they could get their hands on, basically. But the fact of the matter is, it didn't start like that. The concentration camps didn't just start out as extermination death camps. I mean, they always wanted to get rid of the Jews, but when the Nazis first came to power in 1932, they didn't just immediately go full-on Holocaust. The Holocaust didn't actually start until 1941.
Yeah, they worked heavy towards it.
Yeah, they
did everything they could, but it took decades of building, of working with the public, of convincing them of the evils, of building the ghettos, of identifying. And thanks to IBM, tracking and databasing them all. And I mean, it was decades of building the sentiment, of identifying what they could get away with, of working towards this problem with Himmler helping to lead the way on a lot of that charge. And the problem we have here right now is that what you can identify today is the same type of stuff you could have identified in the early to mid 1930s as the march towards the Holocaust started.
Right. Like, they already had concentration camps in 1936. They weren't the death camps yet. They were what would eventually become the full-on larger concentration
camps.
Well, the extermination camps were specifically constructed separately and were usually outside of Germany. So the ones that they built in 36 stayed concentration camps, and a lot of people died in them. But they were like the nucleus that would eventually become the core of the concentration camp system. Yes. They were already there. They were already putting people in those camps, and it looked an awful lot like what we're seeing now.
It's crazy.
And then we have, people that were, people that were part of the Japanese American internment, like George Takei going, well, we were interred, but at least they didn't split us up from our parents.
Yeah.
Like, literally people that were part of the Japanese American internment, the one of the worst human rights abuses in modern American history on domestic terms, saying, at least it wasn't as bad as this.
That's where we are.
Yeah.
That is thanks to Donald Trump, DHS, and ICE.
And now we have video of ICE agents boarding buses, regular like coach buses, and demanding to know if people are U.S. citizens. And then when someone is like, do we have to be U.S. citizens to ride this bus? An employee of the bus line goes, yes. And
which is not true.
Of course not. Why would, imagine you want to get, you're a Canadian visiting the U.S. and you have to be a U.S. citizen to ride Greyhound? Why? No. That doesn't make any sense. Why would anyone do that? But that wasn't company policy at all. But this guy just went along with that.
It is the march towards fascism. It is the march towards Nazism. It is the march towards these types of things that people are getting scared of now. So when you get angry that someone's calling these people Nazis because you don't think it's reached the level of 1941
you're right.
Germany,
it hasn't reached 1941 yet. That's the point. We don't want to get there.
This is how you get there.
Yeah, and you can see these people being actively emboldened by all of this.
I had an interesting conversation a few weeks ago with a friend whose whole family is in law enforcement, a few cops, a state trooper, and all that fun stuff. And in talking to my friend, they were talking about the interesting fact that they have been talking to their family about all these issues. And one of the things that I was told was that he had heard from his uncle, a state trooper, this. You have the problem of ICE never really having been met by protest in the U.S. It's never really had people just trying to get into its buildings, blocking its entrances, getting in the way of it, arresting people in any kind of a scale. So you land in this position where a bunch of ICE officers have been sitting on their weapons, doing nothing with years of training and experience, bored off of their asses for decades, waiting for a fight.
Ever since 9/11, when ICE was formed.
And now you bring it to them. You bring them the fight. You walk up to them and start yelling and screaming to these people who have been sitting around doing nothing. What do you think happens to someone who really badly wants to use his gun or his ability to do anything to you, really, who has been bored for 17 years? I think a lot of them are going to overreact.
Also, there's this whole Trump border security. We need to hire all these border agents. Well, where are these border agents going to come from? You need to hire all these people in a hurry? You're talking in a hurry. You're going to be lowering standards. You're going to be hiring people without proper background screenings. You're not going to have proper training. They're going to be people that joined up because, man, they're expanding it. And now I'm a big fan of this new cause. We're going to beat us some immigrants, You're not
going to get the right people.
No, of course not. It's a predictable outcome there.
So we're going to end up with a fight against ICE, a group of people who are actively doing things that I would say a majority of America disagree with. And
if you pay attention to reports coming out of groups like the ACLU, among others, but also the other one was... I thought I had that in the notes, but I do not see it. Anyway, there are a couple of reports that came out recently about things that have been going on in ICE custody, including allegations of abuse of immigrant children, people that have been detained getting called baboons and gorillas and being encouraged to fight each other, told that no one will believe their complaints. Being denied, proper access to treatment and things like that. Just all sorts of horrible stuff that are, all of the bits and pieces that come together to produce something like the Holocaust.
Indeed. So now we find ourselves talking about all of these people in power who are doing things that we definitely don't agree with. Everyone from the president to the president's representatives to the head of DHS to all the people in ICE. And we start talking about how to treat these people in public when you see them. Because, if you're around the DC area or sometimes the New York area, you are going to run into people who work for the administration that you highly disagree with. And the conversation has led to civility. How do you interact with these people when you despise everything that they stand for without resorting to base human instinct of, punching them in the face? You have to find a way to hold back a little there. Use your words, express your intelligent opinions, get them to listen.
But you know what? The thing is, people are talking about how people need to be more civil. And frankly, that is a load of shit.
Agreed.
Because they keep saying that these people are, attacking Republicans or conservatives or Trump supporters or the administration, whoever. And that, they're being uncivil by, yelling at them or not wanting them in their restaurants or, yelling "fuck you" at them when they see them. And, well, sure, that's not very civil, but so what?
Yeah, either is Sarah Huckabee Sanders standing in front of the U.S. people on national television during a White House press conference, lying in response to every single question asked. Everything out of that woman's mouth is a lie.
Yeah. And I mean, a lie in support of unfathomably awful causes.
It is horrible. And if they feel they can treat us as the American public like that, if they feel they can get away with what they are doing, then they deserve to be treated how they're getting treated. They deserve to be thrown out of restaurants. They deserve their own medicine because they believe, thanks to multiple decisions we see now at the Supreme Court level and other places, that depending on your views, be them political or religious, you should get to choose who the patrons of your establishments are. Look at the Colorado wedding cake case.
Yes.
The Republicans and religious right believed that they should have the choice of whether they wanted to serve that couple. In that same regard, any restaurateur in the DC area should be able to choose whether they allow Sarah Huckabee Sanders or Kirsten Nielsen or any of these others to sit and eat at their restaurant.
And you know what? It's even worse because, first of all, never mind the fact that you're the people are saying that it's about politics and that these are their political views, and that's just as bad to target them over that as as sexuality or religion or whatever. Well, that's dumb because it's not an immutable characteristic like sexuality or something that's
Right.
but it's worse than that because it's not actually about their political views. They're not talking about like, oh, you're a staffer for a Republican congressman, get the hell out. That isn't happening. It's these high level people that are making these important decisions and choosing to be a part of this very specifically and actively at a high level. They're not being excluded because of their political beliefs. They're being excluded because of their awful choices of actions.
Yeah, I mean, they are doing it to themselves.
And the thing that really boggles my mind is that this whole thing about civility and how important it is when we have things like Unite the Right, where neo-Nazis show up and march with tiki torches about how Jews will not replace us and chant blood and soil and then murder people.
Yeah.
And we're the uncivil ones. Right. That makes perfect sense.
It does.
We've had this conversation over and over throughout history. You can find a New York Times op-ed written in 1934 by a Quaker professor talking about how Jews need to engage in goodwill towards the Nazis. He actually said, quote, "By hating Hitler and trying to fight back, Jews are only increasing the severity of his policies against them. If Jews throughout the world would try to instill into the minds of Hitler and his supporters recognition of the ideals for which the race stands, and if Jews appeal to the German sense of justice and the German national conscience, I am sure the problem will be solved more effectively and earlier than otherwise," end quote.
That went well.
Yeah. How did that go?
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's a very famous portion of Letter from a Birmingham Jail by Martin Luther King Jr., where he wrote, quote, "I must confess that over the past few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, 'I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action,' who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for, quote, a more convenient season," end quote. Like,
Martin Luther King Jr.
And if you look at the history, it's very easy to find, all the things where every time there's like a Black Lives Matter protest and afterwards, some black bloc people showed up and threw some trash cans through windows, or there was, something like that happened. People are like, look, they're just looting and rioting. It's not really a protest. Why can't they be, civil and respectful? You can literally find all of that same stuff being said about Martin Luther King in the 60s.
Yes.
It is not hard. You can literally find political cartoons from the time making those exact same claims.
The lives of people who do and believe what this administration is doing and professing to believe should be disrupted and made uncomfortable by anyone who knows better. You should not allow people to do what they do, to say what they say without repercussions.
That just makes
freedom of speech
them and
is
empowers
fine.
them.
Freedom of speech is fine, but that does not mean there aren't repercussions societally. No. That does not mean that other people will have serious problems with what you've had to say and force you to defend yourself against them. And you can't just be an observer either. There is no more neutral on this one. I'm sorry, but there is no more neutral.
I forget who originally said it, but there's a very famous quote about how like most of the evil in the world is done by people who didn't choose to do good or evil.
Yes. So with all that said, we get to Unite the Right from Charlottesville and DC. So Unite the Right was the Charlottesville protest just about a year ago. And this, of course, led to a murder
which recently
vehicle.
Had 30 federal charges come down in conjunction with it.
Yes.
Hate crime charges, no less.
They are in the midst of planning Unite the Right 2, also to be held in Charlottesville and DC, and with corresponding ones around the world, including one here in Boston where we are. And the fun group over at Unicorn Riot got copies of months of chat logs from a Facebook group where Jason Kessler, the organizer of the first one and person currently organizing the second one, a white supremacist, was working with various people to organize the event, the travel, the housing, the security, everything necessary to pull this off. And some of the more interesting chat message show Kessler arguing with other chat participants about how to normalize anti-Semitic views without delegitimizing the criticism with cartoon anti-Semitism. And basically, what he'd like to do is be anti-Semitic, but find ways to normalize it and not make it so cartoony as to be easily lampooned.
Yeah, after all, then people won't take it seriously, and how are they supposed to spread their views?
So this group's chat logs are out there. I've tweeted them out. I've shared them on Facebook. Anyone can find them. Unicornriot.ninja is their website. These logs are horrible, but they
chock full of neo-Nazis.
Chocked full of neo-Nazis. Many. They are planning on inviting neo-Nazi congressional candidate Paul Nealon, former KKK leader David Duke. This is the group that is trying to make this Unite the Right to happen.
Oh, and if you just happen to see that one non-white speaker at one of their events, they talked about planning about bringing that in so that it wouldn't be as obvious when they brought someone like David Duke.
And of course, they've been reaching out to all of the violent neo-Nazi groups like Vanguard America, Fraternal Order of Alt Knights,
Hammerskins,
American Guard, all of the real white supremacist / neo-Nazi groups out there to help provide security for the events. So I would say go read these logs if you really want to understand their mind, and if you are one of those people complaining that maybe you shouldn't call them Nazis, go read them being Nazis. Literally.
They are very, very clearly Nazis.
So we move back to Scott Pruitt here. And
how do we keep coming up with him?
Level of corruption is mind-blowing.
The worst part is there's so many scandals, but so many of them are so petty.
Yeah,
it's not even like high-level corruption. It's just petty crime.
That level of government, yeah.
I mean, sure, there's, all of his awful work as the actual administrator of the EPA, where he undermines the EPA's mission at every turn.
His war on science.
His war on, all forms of science, up to and including things that we loosely call science, like economics. Because he doesn't like those either, because they also show that we should do things about climate change. And, often the regulations are actually net positive. But no, even aside from his misadministration of the EPA itself, on an ideological level there, his personal corruption of the EPA for his personal benefit, it's just petty, like using EPA staff members to try to get his daughter a summer internship at the White House, or to go try to get him a used mattress from the Trump Hotel, or
to go on vacation to a list of countries he wanted to visit and to find ways to make it official.
Yeah. And getting him tickets to the Rose Bowl. One
of my biggest problems is the retaliatory efforts he's made against people that he just assumes might have been leakers of information that he didn't want leaked to the public because, well, they're true. Where he attempts to make sure that people who leave the EPA can't get jobs other places just to ruin their careers.
Yeah. Which
as a scare tactic to keep other people from possibly leaking the truth. We need whistleblowers at that level of government, and we need people like him to be put in jail.
Yes, where firmly belongs. And I mean, the crazy thing is, even after just like the 4 new things we learned about him this week, before that, just talking about the personal petty corruption on his part, we had over a dozen prior stories just on him. he is maybe not very imaginative in terms of the scale of his corruption, but man, prolific. Unbelievably prolific.
It is surprising the laundry list of things that any EPA chief has done here, in that, past ones you could only yell at for either being far too left or far too right, depending on which side you were on, and whether you believed in their version of science or not. His level of corruption is going so far beyond that, at levels that just make no sense. Everything from millions of dollars wasted on something to little $43,000 things. It's just
Like a
everything in
soundproof.
between. Like it's crazy that this person is our EPA chief, and we end here on a wonderful note about the fact that the U.S. has abandoned the Human Rights Council.
Yes.
This is absolute insanity. Human rights are absolutely necessary. We must not only enforce them, but work towards them all over this world. And 12 rights and AIDS groups, including Human Rights First, Save the Children, CARE, all of them have warned Pompeo that the U.S. withdrawal would make it more difficult to advance human rights priorities and aid victims of abuse around the world. The director of the ACLU Human Rights Program, Jamil Dakwar, said Trump's, quote, misguided policy of isolationism only harms American interests. And that it does. It's just, it's isolationism. It is protectionism. It is nationalism. It is everything wrong with Trump and his administration.
Yeah. And, anyone that, has any desire whatsoever to make the world a better place, why walking away from the Human Rights Council is just like unthinkable. Why would you even think that was a good idea? Even if you disagreed with how it was being run, staying there to try and pursue, improving the situation just seems like the obvious move.
So this weekend, there are protests all over the country against the family separation. Some are for defunding ICE. Some aren't bringing that one up. But it's all around the same problem, the immigration problem. And I would really recommend everyone that cares about this subject to show up. The numbers are important. But more important than just showing up is reaching out to your senators, your congressmen, your congresswomen, your representatives, and letting them know where you stand on this one. They will be running in the midterms on immigration. It will be a tentpole of every one of the campaigns. They will choose sides, and you need to help them inform their side. Make those calls, make those emails. That is our show for today. Thanks for listening to episode 62 here.
The GreggHoush Show was created by GreggHoush, executive produced by co-host Eric Gaures, and co-hosted by Kayla Avery. Other contributors include producer and writer Anna Jeffrey, co-host producer David McGuffin, and writer-engineer Robert Tortora. Theme music for this show was produced and recorded by Geneva de Colbert. Our interns include co-host Casey McLaughlin, writer-engineer Alec Greeny, writer Maddie Locicero, and associate producer, writer, and announcer William Kennedy. You're listening to New Revolutionary Radio, your call to action.